congratulations.
Thank you.
How many years are you turning in here?
23 and a half.
23 and a half.
Yeah, this will be 23 years, 5 months at the end of, here at the end of April.
And today is your actual last day.
I will be getting off shift here in just a few minutes, and this will be the very last day, yeah.
Yeah. And then it's your flag ceremony right after that.
Right after that.
Mm-hmm.
And then we all get together, and hopefully I make it through without crying, and then that's all she wrote.
Yeah. What are your feelings leading up to this day? How was this last tour for you?
It's pretty hard to describe. It has been very emotional, and it's back and forth. And I think that for myself, I've kind of crafted my next step and the next place that I'm going, and that's been very influential in me feeling like I've completed this chapter, and I feel fulfilled and I'm ready to move on. So I have some excitement, and I have some looking forward to going on and doing something else, and then I have a lot of reservations about leaving and whether I'm ready to go. And throughout my entire career, my plan was always to complete my career and leave while I was still productive and while I was still contributing, and to not reach the point where I was burnt out or not participating or not giving my all here. Mm-hmm. And so then as I approach this part where I start to retire now, in reflecting on that, it's fitting. It's hard to leave. And I think that's actually purposeful in my retirement.
Yeah.
Because I'm still happy. Because I could still keep coming.
Right.
And
you don't want to walk away and just burn the bridge and
yes.
never see it again. Yeah.
And so that part makes it hard to leave. I still love the job. I still like coming. I still like being here. But that's kind of purposeful in the way I wanted to leave. So a lot of this hard part that I'm feeling is by design. It's my own fault. But
you've always been, well, for sure in my eyes, and I think in the majority of our department's eyes, very purposeful, like you said, and very aware of what your intentions are and maybe what the outcomes are going to be as a result of that. Is that something that you feel you always had throughout your career, or something that you kind of grew as you grew in the career?
No, I think it's grown. I think I've definitely kind of matured into it, and if it was happening in the beginning, it was by accident. And maybe they were happy little accidents that, as I started seeing them and I started reflecting on them, I grew into doing them on purpose and making a little bit more. And that's really for me, has been the way I've been successful in having some influence on what the outcomes will be. I've already considered what might happen, and I'm comfortable with it. And I'm always trying to make choices that the choice I make right now will leave me more options next time. And as I look at it, and the more often I make choices, and the more often I choose the path that leaves me more options, I find myself in more positions where, both of those are equally good outcomes.
Yeah. It's a good position to be in.
Yeah.
And so I would assume you're doing that for your next career as well. Looks like you kind of set yourself up well for that.
I have, and that's what, like I said, it was important to me that when I started working here, and I was very young, and this is the only job I've ever known, and I've always looked at it as I want to reach the point where I'm completed. Yeah, like it's this portion of my life. When I came, I did well. I'm very proud of what I've done. I've made a contribution, and I'm fulfilled.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of bookend on finishing it, and then that leaves the door open to go do something else.
Yep.
And that's kind of without reservations to go do it. I've done the best I could here,
Yeah.
and I'm contented and fulfilled and ready to go to the next chapter. And so then I did start thinking, what's the next thing? What would I want to do next? And I kind of, over the past few years, have crafted that and have found it. And it's a really blessed position to be in, to be able to have some say in what your destiny is going to be, and be making those choices.
Yeah.
So I feel very fortunate to now be at this point where this is what has been created.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's encouraging, especially like for me personally. I've been all about fire,
Mm-hmm.
and then once you start getting towards more so the tail end of your career, it's like, well, I don't want to just like go home and not do anything. And then I think as you mature, you start developing like your own personal passions.
Mm-hmm.
Like how can you align those passions with another career that would give you the same satisfaction? So it's been really cool to see you doing that with your own personal passions and kind of turning hobbies into actual careers that you're going to follow up with. So it's been really cool to see, and especially like as you were able to balance the school work very well.
Mm-hmm. I think that, like, maybe to touch on an example that's probably dear to you and you've exemplified over all these years, but we do a really good job of explaining how physical fitness is important to our job now and how it makes our job better. But we also dangle this carrot of, if you maintain yourself well here, then part of the perk is when you retire, you'll be able to enjoy and move on and still make the most of the rest of your life after that. Mm-hmm. And we use that as somewhat leverage to keep motivated here, maintaining our physical fitness, because sometime in the future, when you retire, you'll be able to make the most of your retirement. You can still do whatever you want then. And I bring that example up because I think we've somewhat missed the boat on a lot of the other aspects of our job. That if we're purposeful and we kind of craft and capture what we do here, it's not about like, oh, I could move on and be a chief somewhere else. That's great if you want to move on and be a chief somewhere else. Mm-hmm. What we've got and what we build over the course of our careers also sets us up to go do whatever you want afterwards. Not just go be a chief somewhere.
Yeah.
Right? I want to go out into the forest and catch baby elk. It's the rest of our career here that has built that into it and given me the skills, the ability to go to school and keep going and apply myself and set goals and tasks and a lot of the mundane stuff that is really a drag here while we're working, doing budgets and typing memos and answering emails. Like, that's actually the stuff that translates to, you could go out and apply that and do whatever you want afterwards.
Yeah.
And I think that we, in the example of our physical fitness, we see what we're doing here today benefits our job, but also sets us up to do something later. We haven't done a good job of capturing the rest of what you're doing here today needs to be done today. But if you do it right, it sets you up to go on and do whatever you want afterwards.
Yeah.
And that might be chief somewhere else, or that might be go to the forest and catch baby animals, or or it may be do nothing.
Yep.
Whatever it is, if you choose that's what you want to do, what you're doing now contributes to that. And so that's really, especially towards the tail end of my career, the last few years, I've really seen that and been able to leverage those experiences that I had here that were just part of doing my job. Well, actually, now that I go out into the real world, they're very special.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
The experiences that I had here that were just the stuff I had to do, once I write them up and craft them and go out and sell them, that's what's paving my road to go do what I want to do.
Yeah, they're marketable skill sets.
They're skill sets.
Yeah.
And it's not, I can still write an EMS report, which I probably can't. It's, I can complete paperwork. I can understand and complete the tasks and do this stuff on time. Well, that translates to any other job you have. It may not be an EMS report, but surely I'm going to have to write something down out in the forest.
It's a good point. It's more than just your para.
Yeah.
Right? Like you should be depositing little things here and there, your skill sets, your physical fitness, all of that.
All of that.
Yeah, I like that.
And as we look at some of the positions in our organization that we've maybe have struggled to fill, where people go and take these kind of new positions, we always look at them as sort of like, well, this will further your career here. But those administrative positions and the skills, and when you take them, they're not just about furthering your career here. That's the skill set that afterwards you could package up and become very marketable, and you can go out and do what you want to do afterwards.
Yeah, I like that. Okay, so we kind of had a conversation on like how we were gonna do this interview, just loosely the other day. So one of the ones that I prefaced was like, I always want to ask the guys, like, if there's one position that you just get really excited for or amped up for, that you'll probably either miss the most, or one that you're going to look back on and go like, God, that was a good part of the job. What would you say is like the best part of the job that you're probably going to look back on, especially when you're kicking it in the woods?
In the woods?
Yeah.
Well, you know that I'll have a hard time answering it with just one
Yeah,
answer.
of course.
Right. So, but in the big picture, it's this position. It's the shift commander spot. It's being a member of senior staff and the role that I served as being a battalion chief. This is the spot I will miss. Like, it's the actual rank of battalion chief, and then the being a part of senior staff, all my peer level. I feel like we've done a fairly good job of expressing to the organization what some of the downsides are and what some of the headaches are, but we haven't done as good a job of expressing like how good these spots are. And if what you're interested in is being influential, or if what you're interested in is making some changes, or you like to steer the cart in the direction that we're going, these are the spots where you can do that. And that's what I, as my career progressed and I moved up, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be involved. I wanted to be a decision maker. And these positions in senior staff or the shift commander spots, they come with some baggage. I do a lot of stuff on my time off. I am here all the time. I do field phone calls, right? But all the stuff that we've done a really good job of kind of making it clear, right? On the other hand, like, this is the spot where I was the most, where I feel the most accomplished in making a difference. And that's what I wanted to do. Yeah. And I don't think any of the other positions, where I was at as a company officer or as a firefighter, or like, I wasn't making as much of the difference as I wanted to. And so being up here and in this position is my favorite one. This is the one I'll miss. Is straight up shift commander.
They're just. Oh, sorry.
No, I will say the role that was actually very influential, and I feel very fortunate to have got the opportunity to do it, was academy coordinator.
Mm-hmm.
So they're a little short-lived, they're a little bit of time, but if I look back on my career and kind of the time frames in my career that shaped the way I think and the way I work and what I do, the time I spent as academy coordinator and that entire process was very influential. And so that's the second part of my answer.
Yeah, I think that's a good little dovetail to another thing that I think is really important that we discussed, and that is from academy on. Do you think that there are some things that we could improve upon with our personnel, or some things that we could improve upon amongst the academy setting that you maybe tried to do or struggled with, or that you think we could try and continue on?
So I do, and throughout my entire career, I've always taken a step back and looked at our organization, and I've felt that we're somewhat backwards in the level of expectation that we put on our new people, and then it kind of wanes as we get more and more tenured. And the process of the academy and the selection process, we're getting the best of the best with honors, and we bring them into the academy and we hold them to this super high exacting standard where if you step out of line you're fired, and we continue that into their probationary year, and they've got these giant packets of stuff they have to fill out, and they need to be busy all the time, and their attitudes need to be exemplary, and their teamwork has to be on point, and we bring that into the academy setting, and we have that high level of expectation. But then as we become more and more tenured through our careers, some of that polish seems to wear off. Mm-hmm. And I've always struggled with that, of like, how do we, those are the new guys. When we look at some of the more tenured members and the older people in their positions, like, they should have it mastered by now. They should be the ones who are making this look easy and performing at that level, because they have all the practice and they have all the time and they've been doing it. And so in my mind, it's always been a little bit backwards, of like these brand new guys that are, they can't, it's all overwhelming. They don't know what they're doing. They're here, but we expect such a high level from them. But then we somehow, towards the end of our careers, find this soft spot in our heart to like cut some people some slack. And I'm not even necessarily saying that that's wrong.
Right.
I'm saying that if we have a soft spot and we can cut some people some slack because people warrant getting some slack, well, then we can apply that to the new people, mm-hmm. or vice versa.
Right.
If it's okay to expect that they are on point day one, when everything is a blur to them, we should be able to expect that on the end of your 20 years, you're on point, you're practiced, you're there. And so that's something that I've struggled with, and you can definitely, if you take a step back and look at our organization, you see how that's not, that exists on almost any aspect of our job we talk about, where you just kind of, that trend exists. Mm-hmm. And there's exceptions to it, and there's people who take it upon, there's individuals who take it upon themselves to rise. I'm not talking about individuals who of their own volition keep that up. Right. I'm talking about as an organization, what is our expectations? And as a group, we seem to be comfortable with that trend. And so I worked on that for many years. I've scratched my head on it a lot. I never came to a point where I was comfortable with the answer and with that position. So, you know, if I was to leave something here as a challenge to everybody else, and those of you that are now the tenured members of our department, it's to think about that and reflect on it and see if you can solve that. See if you can answer that question and kind of solve that challenge that in 20 years I was never able to. So that would be my challenge to you all is to get to the bottom of that one. Solve that for me someday, and I'll come back and see what it means.
Good luck with that one. I like your explanation too, because I think a lot of times if we get into those discussions, a lot of people will take the extreme on either side. So they'll say like, well, what's the big deal with all the discipline? I'm still doing my job. Mm-hmm. Or the other extreme where it's like, absolutely, then let's start doubling down on our discipline within the online membership so it matches the academy. Mm-hmm. And I like how you are like, well, is it really that important that we instill it in the academy if we're not doing it every day on the job? Or vice versa, should we start instilling it more? Mm-hmm. And there is that weird conundrum where it's like, yeah, where's the wheat from the chaff kind of thing? And I've definitely felt that as PT coordinator. I've voiced this with you, where like there are days where I'll be basically preaching to the cadets, right? Like you need to be squared away, and as they're doing push-ups, telling them how important discipline is. And then once I'm done with PT, come back to work, to the station, and it's almost like, oh, the bubble that we're in doesn't necessarily match this world that we're operating in. And that also has bugged me for a while, where it's like, how do we start making those match a little bit more, or at least flow a little bit better, mm-hmm. to where the cadets aren't graduating and coming online and going like, oh, it's nothing like they were saying at all. Like either they're hypocrites or liars or mm-hmm. what is this? Now I have to learn how to operate in this world, and that's a tough challenge for sure.
I think that if I look back on the past 2 decades of this problem, while I'll admit I wasn't able to solve it, that disparity is getting smaller. Mm-hmm. As an organization, the difference between what we tell cadets, this is how you're supposed to act, and what they encounter when they come out, it's getting closer. As a membership, you know, there is a step up in the level of what our commitment to training is, or how we carry ourselves, or it's closer now, and so, you know, that can continue maybe over the next 20 years, and it closes the gap, and then maybe it takes 100 years for it to switch the way in my mind I think it should be, and maybe it never should shift. Maybe it never should be that that we're really cracking the whip on 25-year members, and you make one mistake and you're fired. It doesn't work that way. Right. It can't work that way. And that kind of goes back to the point that you keyed in on, is like, well, then should we treat them that way? Mm-hmm. And if we should, well, then there's some value in it, and it should apply to everybody for that particular aspect. Mm-hmm. Right? Yeah.
Okay. So this one, I don't know how to. I'm really hoping we could glean some learning points from this, but I think it is a touchy subject, and I think it still is just the way that our shifts operate. But I really mentioned this to you, right? I really wanted to bring up, in the past, there was a residential structure fire that happened. And from that fire, there were just some different, I think, tactical perspectives at that point. And one Battalion Chief Brinkerhoff, who I was a huge fan of, he was a big mentor of mine, basically pointed you out and started calling for your head almost. And it got it got very ugly very fast and very weird in terms of like we're still working together, but it almost became this like A shift versus C shift kind of thing. And I think looking back now on how narrow minded I was and just following what C shift was saying and not necessarily looking at a, like you say, like a global department perspective. I think you have done a very good job coming out of that, especially when you were a very brand new BC, coming out of that and not being jaded, I guess, from all of that, or at least not showing it, right? Like for sure, I'm sure there's some emotions that still are tied to that.
Mm-hmm.
But in the way that you treat the department, you could never tell that even happened. I think people that have come onto the department after that don't see that in you. And that's a rare thing to find because there are some people that I've talked to that have retired that are still holding on to some grudges, which is very weird.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you could touch on that however you want, I'd really appreciate that, and I think that helped our department.
I will. I think that, you know, to preface the whole discussion, one of the things that I've actually made a very distinct point of doing is there's no sense in going back and disparaging the people and the situation and how that was involved. So, you know, I do have my own feelings about how that all went down and who was right or wrong and what should have or shouldn't have been done. And I know that, you know, I'm big enough to admit that when I'm looking at that through my lens and my bias, of course I was right most of the time. And of course my point of view, and I was the one who was being somehow taking the short end of the stick in the whole thing. Mm-hmm. And I'm big enough to admit that if the other half of that equation was sitting here, he'd have the same bias in the other direction. And it may or may not be that he was, you know, like he'd have the same compelling arguments and the same feelings that say like, oh, well, he was the one who was being wronged, or he was the one who wasn't.
Mm, yeah.
And so I think that one of the things that I would, before we talk about it, is in acknowledging that it doesn't really matter to me which side you fall on. Whether you were a disciple of one or the other, the value in looking back on that is to actually kind of see what happens or what became of two people who were, in their own ways, equally good at what they were doing. We were both very influential. We were both very good at creating this tribe of people behind us. And in looking back on that, you know, I have to lead out with saying that early in my career, BC Brinkerhoff was very influential to me. He's one of the people that I would consider the stronger mentors who shaped how I think about the fire department and what we do. I was 19. I didn't know anything about it. He was a few years ahead of me, and we pretty much chased each other through the ranks the whole time. We worked very closely together. He was a mentor, and I consider him one of my good friends from that time. And that actually kind of made the situation that you're talking about that much harder. Mm-hmm. It's because in some respects, you know, that was the hard part, is we were friends, and I don't know how something, you know, our different opinions and where we got, we very much lost sight of that. And you know, the truth is, we agreed on 95% of stuff in the big picture, and I'll give that to him. That's testament to how much of a mentor he was to me, because I was following in his steps. Mm-hmm. We agreed on like 95% of stuff. If I was to look back and kind of say what happened is the few things we disagreed on, we allowed those differences to become everything. We forgot about all the other stuff that we shared in common and where we agreed, and you know, if we both sat down and mapped out, hey, this is where we need to go, I think the most of the time we would have agreed that's where we need to go.
Yeah.
Where we differed was in like, how are we going to get there? And when we differed on how we were going to get there, it became this antagonistic type of, well, we're going to get there my way. No, we're going to get there my way. Well, then we're not going your way. And the bulk of what we agreed on fell by the wayside. And we forgot that most of that stuff, you know, we shared a very common outlook on what was happening. The few things we disagreed on became everything. Mm-hmm. And we stopped working together or in our own ways working towards the point and started working against each other. And that was done on a very big stage. Yeah. Everybody watched it, everybody saw it, and you know, looking back on it, it's a time that it was influential in me, and coming out of it, thinking about how I could have done things differently. And that's not the same thing as saying like, well, I think I was wrong. I think I was equally right. And maybe that's a better way to put it. You know, we were equally right. Once we got focused on that though, and we were working against each other, it was a very trying time in my career. And I think that, you know, the value at looking back on that is not assigning who was right or wrong. That's all based on the lens you're looking through. Yeah. And you're probably not going to change my mind about who was right or who was wrong. That's not the value in looking back on it. The value is to say, well, what happens when we allow something like that to become everything? Mm-hmm. And what's the fallout from that? And you know, it was very influential to me, and I think that I handled it the best I could then. And if you put me back in that situation right now, surely I'd be able to handle it better. Yeah. Differently. Right? Mm-hmm. And you know, the job we do introduces, you know, we go into situations and we have stress, and so many things are out of our control that add to the level of stress this job puts on us. Mm-hmm. And I think that one of the biggest takeaways for me from that whole experience is, as I look back, that was the most stressful point of my career. And most of that stress was not because I was running terrible calls or I was going out and seeing terrible things. Most of that stress was created because of this animosity that I had with coworkers, mm-hmm. with peers, with feeling like we've chosen these sides, and who's on my side and who's not on my side, and so, you know, to me that's a very powerful takeaway from that is that there's enough stress in this job that we may or may not be able to cope with without us adding that upon each other. The critical nature, the going out and looking at, you know, I'm going to pick apart everything you've done. You know, there's a school of thought that says that's valuable, that we should be critical and we should go and there's a learning opportunity in everything we do if we, that's all fine and good if you're applying that to yourself. And there's a lot to be learned from being critical of yourself. Where this one kind of went astray is it became being critical of other people without really going to them and finding out, well, what did you see? What was your first hand? And most people that are involved in this never actually talked to one or the other of us. to know what we were actually fighting about.
Right.
It was third hand, fourth hand, fifth hand, and everybody, you know, was choosing sides and passing judgment on, without ever really going back and talking to the people that were involved. And, you know, and the fire that you're talking about, that was really, you know, that was probably the thing that soured me the most on it, was I would be open to constructive criticism from any fire if you come and ask me what or why I did in the first place. When that thing took a life of its own and it actually became something it wasn't, my whole goal in life became arguing that that's not what it was.
Mm-hmm.
There was no more learning, there was no more constructive criticism, there was no more growing from that fire. All the value in critiquing that fire was gone, because it wasn't about critiquing and getting better. It was about proving that what was being said was not right.
Yeah.
And that to me was, you know, that was lost. And it was a formidable experience for me that I grew from and tried to come out the other side and not do it. You know, again, looking back, I'm big enough to admit there's two sides to every story, and I may have been right or I may have been wrong, and there's no sense in spending time trying to decide who was right or wrong.
I think you said it very well. A lot of people they'll try and use this righteous platform of like, well, this is just for learning purposes. But a lot of times when you peel that away, it's like there's no longer an intent of learning here. The intent is just criticism of that person.
Right.
And we can misconstrue that sometimes, or some people even use that intentionally. I'm like, oh no, I'm just doing this for the good of the
Mm-hmm.
department. It's like, no, you're not. Like, not anymore. Maybe that's how it started, but it's no longer like that. And I think another big one was, I think this happens with a lot of us, especially in a lot of groups that we have, where we spend so much energy and focus on our differences rather than on that goal that we're trying to get to. And a lot of times people will get just so hung up. I've done it where you just get so hung up on the differences you have with another person, and you completely lose sight of like, what are we actually trying to do? We're trying to get here. And so I think that was, like you said, it was blown up on such a grand scale.
Mm-hmm.
That it is something that I think is very critical for us to remember and to try and get better at, to deal with better, especially if you are going to be someone that is influential in the department. It should be something that you consider where it's like, okay, are we losing sight of the learning opportunities and of the goal and of our friendship,
Mm-hmm.
things like that. So.
Well, that would be, you know, through that whole experience, if there's something that I lament and I'm like, I'm sorry that it was ruined, it's that we were good friends in the beginning. Mm-hmm. And that, you know, like you said, we focused solely on the differences, and to me that somewhat sums up where we went wrong, and whether it was on us to be big enough to take a step back, or whether it should have been our boss or our friends take us to the side or whatever. Mm-hmm. You know, everybody kind of stepped back and just let us go to town on what those differences were. Yeah. And sincerely, you know, we agreed on the vast majority of stuff. We let that become secondary. If we could have just regrouped on, oh yeah, this one thing we'll agree to disagree, continue working on other stuff, we could have been fine. But in the moment, and that moment lasted for years. So in the moment, you know, it was too short-sighted to see that, and it very much became an effort in who's right and who's wrong. And you know, at the end, I don't know who the winner was.
Yeah. Yep, I've been thinking about that, especially with this question, and I was telling Daniels this, I think last night, where it was like, I couldn't imagine, I think I told you this too, like, I couldn't imagine me and Gabe, like, having a difference where all of a sudden he just, like, completely is against me and how that would feel, or any of my mentors, Daniels, Floyd, you, where it's just like, nope, like, you were cut off. Like, that would be a very weird feeling, and it's like, man, yeah, for years that would be tough. That'd be interesting. Switching gears, so I wanted to touch on this because I think it's a very different perspective that some people have, especially in the battalion chief role. So you were saying that this role is probably the one that you would want to be in, right? And I think it might have been like my alternate lieutenant academy that you said this, but it stuck with me. I think it was the alternate lieutenant academy, where you described the battalion chief position different than any other battalion chief at the time, where you stressed that yes, you are someone that does help move the department, but there's also times where you are simply a soldier.
Mm-hmm.
And the only job for you at that time is to carry out the chief's plans. And again, I think that is very short-sighted of some people, where we always want to be fighting against what the chief's directives are.
Mm-hmm.
And you laid it out very clearly, where it was like, I'll give my opinion and I'll try and give some facts and I'll try and argue my case, but once it's a directive, then my role changes to just that of a soldier and carrying out that directive. And for me, like, that was very hard for me to swallow, but as I've gotten deeper into the department, there definitely are times where it's like, well, that's the directive,
Mm-hmm.
and like, I do just have to follow it. And then when you look deeper, it's like, again, well, we're still getting to the same goal, it just wasn't my way. Like, I need to drop all of that animosity that I have and just get to the goal still.
Right.
It's just not my style, kind of thing. And I think that's really huge and very humble of you, where you recognize that early on in your BC career, where it was, no, I'm just fulfilling this directive right now.
So that was one of the things that when I first promoted, and from the 10 years prior to that, and maybe my time as fireman and lieutenant and whatnot, looking up, you very much see on your shifts this hierarchy pyramid structure of your shift commander being the top of that. And so I think that's part of where in our day in and day out operations, that's part of where that perception comes from, is the shift commander is the go-to guy. He is the one who's making the decisions. He does do all that. And on B shift, or in battalion 1 or battalion 2, like, that is the structure, and you're at the top, you're up there. Like, what I soon realized, and what I was trying to point out in those situations, is when I look at myself as a member of senior staff, though, there's the same hierarchy, there's the same triangle. It's just my role is down here at the base of this, and I'm not the top making the decision. And so, to me, a lot of this comes back to how do I, in my mind, rationalize being a shift commander and going out and saying, hey, shift, I know you don't like this, I know you think there's a better way, but your job today is to do this. And how do I, in good conscience, go out and tell my shift, you may not like this, but this is your job, go do it. If, when I come back to this senior staff hierarchy, I'm not willing to do the same. Mm-hmm. And really, that's, in my mind, more how that idea started to take shape, is I couldn't in good conscience come out and be like, well, this is what I think you should do, and you should do it because I told you to. But then I'm not willing to do that and fill that role when somebody else is doing it and telling me. And so I think there's, it's easy to look at that kind of with hyperbole and think that, oh, well, if I was ever told to do something that is unethical or against my fiber or whatever, like, that's not what we're talking about.
Right.
We're not talking about those things. We're talking about the time when, this is the decision that was made. This is the collective direction we're going. And I do think there's a point in that where it's like, you're either in or you're out. We got to go over there. You got to come. And if I'm going to feel comfortable going out to the shift in my role as a shift commander and say, hey, look, this is what you got to do, X, Y, and Z. I'll do my best to explain it to you. I'll do my best to convince you that you want, this is why it's a good idea. And at the end of the day, this is what we have to do. Well, I can't in good conscience go tell people that you have to do it because I said so if I'm not willing to do that. When in this other situation, that's my role, is to, and I've taken that very seriously. My role as a shift commander is to support the direction of the fire department. I said early on in this interview, like, that's what I want to do. I want to be influential. I believe in what we're doing. I believe in the direction we're going. I may have disagreements in how we get there or how fast we should do it or whether that thing is as important as that thing. But in the big picture, I believe in what we're doing as a fire department. And, sometimes my role is to go make it happen. And it is, it's the same expectation that I put onto firemen or cadets. That, sometimes you just have to understand your role is to do this thing. When I said I scratched my head on the expectations of what we put onto cadets, right? We would never in a million years accept that a cadet came out and was like, no, I don't like that. No, I don't like it. I just don't like it. I'd rather do it that way. Well, that's tough. Mm-hmm. Your job is to do it that way. Well, if we can bring that person who's got 2 weeks worth of experience, who doesn't really have this strong commitment to the fire department, to what's going on, and be very clear on, no, sometimes your job is to do what we as an organization have decided. And we can place that expectation on them. Why would it be okay 20 years later when I should be much better at understanding the big picture and much more ingrained in this mission and what we're doing? Why would it be okay for me to then be like, nah, I don't like that? And so it kind of ties all back into that. That's another example of that expectation of, at some point in our career, that as we move through this, and we become more and more tenured, like, no, it's still my job to come here and work. And some days that's work. Mm-hmm. Like, these are the things you need to do. Okay. And so that's somewhat what I was trying to express in those classes, and kind of that to be real and to share that perspective of my role as a shift commander was to ride that fence, was to go back and forth between being the top in this situation and the bottom in this situation. Yeah. And as you characterize that continues all the way up.
Yeah, when you gave that visual, I just saw.
Yeah, like,
over and over. City council, city manager, mayor, like, it just keeps
exactly.
going. Yeah.
That continues on and on and on. And so that's what I was trying to express in those, and I think that's served me well to have that understanding and to be clear in what my role is in that certain circumstance. It's probably saved me a lot of frustration to be willing to just be like, mm-hmm. In this role, I've already said my piece. I've already made my case. The decision has been made. There's no more sense in banging my head on that wall. We'll go do it and see what happens. Maybe I get the chance to be a bigger person and not say I told you so. Yeah. But more often than not, it was okay. Yeah. It was just a different way of doing the same thing I wanted to do that way.
Mm-hmm. So, nice. Is there anything else? I see you have some notes there. Is there anything you want to leave with that we haven't touched on that you think is pretty important that you would try and include, at least in your email? Or
So I wanted a whiteboard in here. You know, I need a whiteboard to be writing this stuff up. That's why I brought notes. I would like to take this opportunity to for the sake of history, revisit my statement that you can do anything you want once. And I think I'm fairly well known for saying that. I think it gets repeated a lot, and it's, you know, I want to take one more opportunity to kind of set into stone really what I mean by that. And, you know, it's often repeated that well, you can do anything you want once. That's what BC Grooms says. And it is what I say. I think the difference is where you put the emphasis in that statement. You know, to be very clear, what I'm saying is you can do anything you want once. And my emphasis is going on the once. And really what it is it's a stab, it's an acknowledgement on my part, trying to say, we're all adults here. We're all responsible for the choices we make. You can make any choice you want. You can do anything you want once. You may not be around long enough to do it twice, but you can do anything you want once. And it's me trying to put back onto individuals this thought that you're responsible for your destiny, for your outcome. You can make a choice. You know, if you don't want to follow a rule, don't follow a rule. You get to do that once. After you've done that, we get to choose whether you're here long enough to break it again. Your only involvement in this was in the initial choice, whether you make it or not. Once you've done it, now the ball moves into somebody else's court to make a decision. How do we feel about that? Should we allow that? Should we not do that? Are you in trouble? Should you be fired? You know, what I'm trying to stress in that, you know, you can do anything you want once. You're an adult who makes their own choices. Do whatever. Once. After that, it's no longer your choice. We get to choose whether you're here long enough to do it twice. And I think that's more, you know, where you put the emphasis in that statement. It's not me saying do whatever you want. It's me saying there's going to be consequences. You make a choice. You do whatever you want once.
yeah,
You may not be here long enough to do it twice. But
yeah, that rings true because there are a lot of times where people come back and they're shocked that there are consequences.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I didn't know that was going to happen. It's like, yeah,
go for it. You do whatever you want once.
yeah. All right. Are there? And you're going to have to do this in like an hour. Are there anybody specific? And I know there's always a laundry list of people that have helped you along the way. Is there anyone specific that you would like to thank, or maybe some things that stood out amongst mentors and leaders that you had along the way that kind of come to mind right now?
You know, there is, and the list is too long to talk about here. You know, I think that early on in my career, I was young enough to come into this kind of very wide-eyed and as an open blank canvas that as I latched onto people, there were some people who were very influential, but as I grew and realized, like, I can't do it their way. I have to figure out how to do it my own way. Mm-hmm. And really, at that point, once I realized that, I think I quit wholeheartedly subscribing to one person's influence. And what I realized is that every single person has something that I can take. You know, so to sit here and like start naming names, it's everybody. You know, as I became more deliberate with recognizing that every person around me has something, I started picking pieces from everywhere. And so, you know, you're on that list, he's on that list, that person, it's basically everybody. And that, because I am pretty definite and very set in my ways and very like, this is me, I'm a known quantity. It doesn't work for me to try to do everything somebody else's way. Mm-hmm. But, you know, the realization that everybody has something to offer to me, from the top to the bottom, whether I spend 20 years with them or whether I'm with them for 20 minutes, if I can glean something to take away from them, then they go on that list you're talking about. And so, you know, it's everybody. It's every one of you guys. I've been watching you. I've been thinking, which part of this game are you better at than I am, and how do I get that?
Yeah.
And so most of you all probably don't even know it, that I've been watching and I've been trying to, you know, you all have something to offer to me that I'm trying to just catch up with you.
Yeah. I think that speaks to definitely your style. For me, I've seen you as one of the more like cerebral, process-oriented, and very like, I'm going to take a wider perspective and look at all these different viewpoints. And I think that really does speak to like a style where it's like, no, I don't have this person's style or this person's style. Like, I have my style, but I've learned like, yep, this is beneficial and this can help me. And it's funny, I was thinking about this. We were talking on the tailgate of my truck, right? And you were giving me some advice, and I definitely, when I looked at BC Brinkerhoff a while back when he came to a retirement ceremony, those are images that I remember of him, of taking people out to the parking lot and him out there for hours sometimes talking to people. And it's like, you don't know like this weird storm that we have in the department of all these different personalities and what people pick from those personalities. And then all of a sudden you've got like this new leader that's completely different, but still has like all these weird qualities. And I think that's something so special in our department if you're able to recognize that. And it's okay, a lot of guys really do just like, nope, that's my guy and I'm going that way. But then we do have some really special individuals where it's like, well, I really like this too, and I really like this. And I think you've been very good at that, where it's like, no, I can see the strong points in your character, and I can relate to those, and I can connect with those. But I can also see the weaknesses that don't necessarily vibe with me, and I can still talk to you on a very pure level without judging those weaknesses and without having those be a huge bias in our conversation. And I think that is very intentional. I think that is something that you've matured to a point, and I think you're going to keep maturing there. So me personally, I like to thank you for being that example. That's something really encouraging to see in a leader. So thank you for that. Got anything else?
No, I mean, I think in looking at this whole process of leaving and going away, you know, I think that for myself, there's been some people who ask me questions, and it's kind of in different contexts have come up, but like, you know, I sincerely hope that when I leave, I don't leave a hole. I know that you guys are going to continue on. I know that there's still a bunch of stuff happening, and very sincerely, like, I hope you guys miss William, but you don't need to miss BC Grooms. Like, and I think that's, you know, My intention, what I wanted to do, how I wanted to be influential was to come and for the span of my career, share everything I had to share. And I think that, you know, I'm humble enough to know that there's some things that I was really good at, and there's some things that I was mediocre at. And when I'm gone tomorrow, those mediocre things will leave. And that leaves room for somebody else to come in and do a better job than I was doing. And sincerely, I hope that the things I was doing good, I did a well enough job of sharing with that person that they continue.
Yeah.
So really, when I leave tomorrow, the only things that are going to go away are the mediocre things that I wasn't doing well, that somebody else can come and do better.
Yeah.
So, you know, to me, it's not, that's one of the things that I'd like to kind of put on the table. That is part of me moving on and me kind of fulfilling what I intended to do here is there's no reservations in me saying that this show will go on, and tomorrow when I'm gone, you guys will do better things than you were doing when I was here. And that's not, you know, that's something that if that's the case, then I feel accomplished. I hope you don't miss me. I hope that whatever good things I had to share in the past 20 plus years, I was able to share them with enough people that those things won't be missed. You don't need me here to do them anymore. I've already done my best to give them out. Mm-hmm. And when I leave, it will only be the stuff that goes away with me that somebody else could probably do a better job anyway. So that's pretty much it.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Congratulations.